Here's a question for you. I have a question for you. Who am I? Oh, I'm John T. Jones. John to you. And I own this website along with a lot of other websites, I guess, for emergency preparedness. I've been in a few emergencies in my day, and I'm sure you have. If you're 81 years old, you've probably been through a lot of them. Most of the time during my life, well, not most of it, but over a third of the time, our country's been at war. I've been in 2 tornadoes. I've been in a flood. I've been very near a bad fire where I was an emergency worker in the forest of Arizona. And then all of us watched the tsunamis that came in, two major tsunamis in the last few years. We all watched that on television, didn't we, and saw the horrible damage in Japan and out there in Malaysia and all such. And we continually see emergencies from the wind, the hurricanes and the tornadoes that come blazing in on us. And there's more. Did I mention earthquakes? Idaho is a very earthquake-prone state. We had one just south of us in Nevada, which has a lot of earthquakes, and just a while back. And if they are in a populated area, like the one that's sort of rattling Reno off and on right now. Stop. I'm sorry that the telephone rang, but it was an emergency for a young lady who has to pay her gas bill today, or else the gas company will shut off her gas. So she asked me if I'd write a check to her gas company to get her through the day, which I'm happy to do. But I'm sorry that we had the interruption. We never know when an emergency like that's going to come, do we? Sometimes we have those kinds of emergencies, especially in this day and age when so many people are out of work and not able to generate the money they need to take care of themselves. In this case, the couple are both handicapped in some ways, and especially her husband has been in a wheelchair for many years after an accident where he fell off of one of our cliffs here in Idaho. And he's been laid up for many, many years because of that accident. So it was an emergency, and they do happen. Now here, let me get on a subject here. Our subject, emergency preparedness. I got a question for you. Are you ready? You'll need a paper and pencil, I think, to write down your answer. No, you don't really need to do that. But here's the question. When is the best time to prepare for an emergency? After the emergency? Many people prepare after the emergency. During the emergency? Well, sometimes you're just too busy during the emergency to do much preparation. But you might be grabbing a coat or something and running out the door. That would be preparing. Before the emergency. That's very nice thinking. But we don't know when it's before or not. We don't know how long before. We just know it's before the emergency because it hasn't occurred yet. But many people prepare before an emergency. Next answer, whenever you get around to it. That's a really good answer, isn't it? That's when we like to prepare, whenever we get around to it. And the other is never. No, never prepare for an emergency. One day at a time. Life comes, life goes. The good Lord's looking out for me. Let that tornado come down my street. I'm going to stand out here and look at it. I'm not going to run into a shelter where it's safe. That kind of thinking has cost the lives of many. I prepared a little script here because I'm old and senile. Sometimes our emergencies that come unexpectedly. They are new and unusual. We didn't expect that kind of an emergency. Sometimes we have to prepare for an emergency without knowing what it is. We don't know what's coming down the road. But there are things that we can do which will help us during an emergency. We are human beings. We need food, shelter, and water. Some kind of liquid nourishment that is mainly water, at least. They're the basic needs of life. We need to be able to stay warm and out of the elements, or stay cool and out of the sun. We got to be able to protect it from the elements, and we have to feed our bodies with food. We need to get it somewhere. Maybe you're good at identifying wild herbs and edible foods like my son is, but somewhere we got to get food and water. Things we need to live. So. Now, when I was in the Army, I lived in a tent. I lived in barracks. Then I lived in a hole in the ground, which we called a hoochie, or you might call a bunker, because there were a lot of boulder rocks on top to help in case a mortar shell came popping on top. It might go off on top without going through. However, they were not always effective, these hoochies, because I remember the second night I was on the line there in Korea. One of them, a mortar went right through the roof of a hoochie, and there were 6 or 7 South Korean soldiers in there, and they were all killed. Just like about a half a dozen that were standing around a fire outside. An open fire, and the mortar round hit right dead in the fire and killed them all. So anyway, that's neither here nor there, right? Over the centuries, people have lived in all kinds of accommodations. I lived in Arizona, and the Apaches down there used to live in these stick huts, and people make homes out of logs, and they put grass sod on the top during the days when everybody was homesteading in the Dakotas, and they had these underground underground homes with sod roofs, because it was hard to find lumber out there. Hard to find a good covering for the roof, and they somehow survived out there. Big boom area out there in the Dakotas now because of the oil. And housing is a problem, but they're building them as fast as they can. So a lot of people have to live in temporary shelters until their homes are built. So that's very, very true. Just got to pause a second here. I apologize again. She came over and got her check, so let's proceed here. Remember the story of the 3 little pigs? 3 little pigs. They were going to build a house, and the first little pig met a man and had some straw. He says, "Hey, Mr. Man, I want to buy that straw so I can build a house." And the straw man said, "Straw's not much good for building houses, but I'll sell it to you if you want it." And the little pig says, "Well, I'll use the straw." And he took the straw and built the house. Sat inside the house and says, "Here I am, warm and comfy in my straw house." Second little pig walked along the road, met a man with a bundle of sticks. He said, "Hey, mister, I need those sticks to build a house." The man says, "Sticks are not very good for building a house. They're better they're better. They are better for building a fire. But I'll sell them to you if you want. So the little pig took the sticks and he built a stick house and set it comfortably and said, I'm in my fine new stick house. Okay, you didn't hear the story this way from your mother or your sister or your aunt or your brother. Maybe you're too young to even have ever heard the story. I don't know. Well, the last little pig, the third little pig, he went down to the brickyard and he bought brick. He bought a bag of mortar. The man says, what are you going to do with this stuff? He says, I'm going to build a house. And the man says, you're very smart to build your house of brick and mortar. So the little pig went home and he slapped up one brick at a time and the mortar, and he had to put in a door, a heavy door, and he put in a fireplace and a chimney, and he had to build a roof and then put on the roofing, and he worked and worked and worked, and finally he just sat down and the house was finished and he says, I'm tired. And he took a nap in front of the fireplace. Well, the big wolf came along. He came up to the first house and he says, hey, little piggy, let me come in. And the piggy says, not by the hair of my chinny chin chin. And the wolf says, then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down. The little piggy says, go ahead and try. I built this house myself. And the pig huffed and he puffed and he blew, and the straw house went off into the wind, and the wolf grabbed the little pig and ate him up. You didn't hear it that way? It's probably a more accurate way to put it. Wolves aren't completely stupid. So the wolf went to the second house. He said, little piggy, let me come in. If you don't, I'll blow your house down. The piggy says, go ahead and try, fathead. And the wolf, he huffed, and he puffed, and he blew the stick house down and grabbed the pig by the back of his neck and ate him up. Now he felt pretty confident. One pig to go. He said, I think I'll wait till tomorrow since I'm pretty full from eating 2 pigs in one day, for heaven's sakes. He waited in the morning. In the morning he got up early and he knocked on the door and said, little piggy, let me come in. The pig says, get lost, wolf. You're not coming in by the hair of my chinny chin chin. The wolf says, then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down. And the little piggy says, what you will do is blow your brains out. Your own brains out. So the wolf, he huffed, and he puffed, and he puffed, and he huffed, and he blew, and boom, his head exploded. The little piggy looked out the door and says, I told you so. Not a flat head anymore, you're a no head. That's the end of that pig story. But we do need shelter, and shelter protects us from oncoming emergencies, doesn't it? Let's see out here. There are things we can do to help prepare for an emergency. We may have some food in our storage. I always have canned goods out in the garage. In fact, I always buy by the case. We live out of the cases out in the garage, and when we use canned goods, and I have a couple of freezers which we pull food out of. And my wife's caregiver plants a little garden, so we do have tomatoes and a few things. So if there's an emergency and you have a garden outside, you might be able to go out and pull out a few carrots just to have something to eat while you're waiting for the emergency to abide. You might have good clothing too hanging on the hooks or so, and you can use in an emergency. You might have an emergency blankets or emergency first aid kits or clothing in the car in case something happens on the road. In Idaho here, you don't want to drive around in Idaho in the wintertime without a good coat on and maybe a blanket or two in the back and some water, and maybe a snack just in case you do go off the road and you need help. It's also a good idea if you have a cell phone to have a charger in your car, so you can keep that cell phone charged and you can call 911 if you're in an area that's accessible to cell phone. Cell phones usually have a GPS in them, and when you call, they'll know right where you are and they'll come right to where you are. That's just worth having, isn't it? Let's see. The point is that I'm trying to make is that we should be aware that an emergency can and will occur. We need to think about what we would do in case of an emergency. You might think about preparing before an emergency occurs. We may want to have food, shelter, water, and such. Camping gear is great for emergencies. You can put up your tent and get out the camping table and slap the Coleman stove on it. Roll out your sleeping bags. If you got some food, you're all set, at least temporarily, until help arrives and you can get proper food and shelter. I remember at a fire one time down in Arizona, we had all of these people just knocked out of their homes, burned, and the firemen, we had to feed everybody and take care of all their needs, and toothbrushes and shaving gear and anything that a person might need when they're completely separated from their home. And we fed them. We fed them well. We fed them really well, I'll tell you, because those firefighters have to have a lot of food and really good food to survive. So think about it. What would you do in case of wind, fire, flood, earthquake, tsunami, a car crashing into your living room? Well, that does happen. Some people have homes on a corner and they'll put up a barrier to a car that might come across their lawn and crash into their home. We just had one the other day here. It was in the paper. We have it quite often here in Idaho that people have vehicles crashing into their homes. Well, be prepared. I used to be a Boy Scout. That was our motto. Be prepared. I guess we're always a scout. Once a scout, I guess you're always a scout. My 4 sons are all Eagle Scouts. Some of my grandsons are Eagle Scouts. Some are still working on it. You want to be prepared. Thank you for listening to this old man in Buell, Idaho.